you've been studying neuroscience for a long, long time, in neuroeconomics and behavioral economics. How has your research changed the way you present information?
Probably some of the things we talked about already. The idea is that one should be sensitive to the audience, that you should try to simplify information in a way that fits with people's preconceptions, but does so, and so you're still in control. So I can simplify something, but when I simplify, I do that because I want them to not focus on that information, focus on some other point, or I'm going to simplify to develop their intuition and then change it. So those are all things that come out of my own research. I think part of it comes from recognition of my own limitations. Like I realize that there's things I don't know, and using yourself, like if this doesn't make sense to you, it's not going to make sense to an 18-year-old in the audience who's particularly motivated to be there. So I think that part of any presenter's goal should be to recognize throughout that they're always having a conversation with the audience, even if the audience isn't replying in the moment. The audience is interacting with them. They're trying to process what they're saying, that they're watching the body language, they're waiting for pauses and so forth. The audience member is always treating everything as if you're having a one-on-one conversation with them. If not, they've just checked out. And so I think that my research helps keep me grounded in those ways, so that I think I can often be able to communicate effectively with people. And when it doesn't work, it's often because I misread the audience. So I might think that this audience knows something about the brain, but it turns out they don't. Or I might think that these are people who, for example, I might be using financial examples about retirement, and wait a sec, these are undergrads, and they don't actually know anything about what an IRA is or what a 401k is, and so forth. So I think as a general rule, if you're able to think about your communication with the audience members and just sort of never forget that, then that can help guide effective presenting across a lot of contexts.
Is there anything that you would recommend us not do that you see is a common behavior?
Well, I think probably the easiest thing not to do is to present an overload of information that makes sense to you, but won't make sense to an audience. And you often see this when people are not very confident with their own abilities, and so they put a lot on slides or put a lot of text up because they want to have that crutch there that they can rest on while they're talking about this. And reading from a slide, especially reading a lot of text on a slide, does no one any good. Audience members can do it just as well. They're actively doing it at the same time you are, so there's actually a type of interference that arises because of that. And there's no sort of work required on their part or your part to be able to understand this. I much prefer when people present and recognize they might make mistakes. They might stumble over the words occasionally. They might go off on a slight tangent on the slide. And it turns out all those sorts of little imperfections are part of everyday sort of communication, and it makes communication and conversation more effective. It's just an analogy. I mean, you can imagine if you're trying to look at a face, and the face was just like a robot face, where it was too perfect and too clean and too simplified. There's no information there. Whereas if you look at a face of somebody who's in her 70s and sort of weathered by life, but still has a little smile there, it's going to be a much more engaging sort of face to look at. And there's more information there, and you can relate to that one better. And it's not perfect, but it carries with it some other things that fit your expectations. And I sort of see presentations that way, that people over-practice them, they put too much information up, they are afraid of making mistakes, and if they just went out there and talked, paused, tried to relate to their audience, laughed at themselves a little bit more, it would be a better conversation.
And that seems to have resonated, that whole idea that you're actually, the audience is perceiving a one-on-one conversation with the speaker. So if we think about it, what we really should be doing is optimizing it for that kind of conversational thing. And so those imperfections,
right,
while they may not, they deteriorate from the idea of us
right,
being perfect,
right,
they actually make us more human and
right,
more approachable in
right,
that conversation.
Right. And I think, and I should say that I'm generalizing a bit. If I'm a presidential candidate or a president giving the State of the Union address, you don't want to be hemming and hawing. Every word counts. It's going to be analyzed later. If there's going to be a transcript of your talk, then of course it's not a conversation anymore. It's a different thing. It's a speech, and it's a speech for posterity. But that's not what most people do. I mean, most of the time when people are presenting, it's to a group. It might be to the people at their company that are advocating for the position, or it's just in a room, and they happen to be at a party, and they have the audience for a moment, and they're trying to just tell a joke or talk to people. And in those contexts, having a imperfect but human presentation style is going to be better than trying to be completely perfect, highly stylized, mannered, and all the things we say when we see somebody and they just don't seem like one of us. And there's a lot worse things to do with giving a talk, to present your information in a way that's memorable and where you personally are relatable. Usually those are, once you've got those two things, the rest is details. And I think that by trying to optimize the information presentation, people forget about the second component.